5 o'clock in the morning, in the gray static of a doorbell camera, I watched a 78-year-old woman I had hated for 12 years fall down hard on the ice of my own front steps. The very steps I had just learned, 10 seconds earlier, that she had been the one salting. She went down like a dropped coat. And then, while I sat at my kitchen table in my robe with my coffee going cold and my hand pressed over my mouth, I watched her get back up, alone, in the dark, and finish the job. I had put that camera up to catch her. I need to be honest about that from the very start, because the whole shape of this story is the shape of a woman who set a trap and caught nobody in it but herself. I believed Edith Mercer was a bitter, spiteful old woman who had been waging a petty war against me for more than a decade, and I had spent $200 on a camera over my door for the express purpose of finally catching her in some act of meanness I could hold up to the world as proof. And the camera, God help me, caught the truth instead. It just was not the truth I had gone hunting for. My name is Lauren. I am 43 years old, and I own the hardware store on the main street of our town in Brattleboro, Vermont. The kind of store where a person comes in needing one wood screw and leaves an hour later having told you about their divorce. I am good at my work. I am practical. I am decisive. I can look at a broken thing and see almost at once the way to fix it. And I have come to believe it was exactly that quality, that fast, confident competence, that cost me 12 years with the woman who lived next door. Because I sized Edith Mercer up the way I size up a busted hinge, in about 4 seconds. And I was wrong, and I never once in 12 years went back to check my work. I should tell you what kind of woman I was that first year, because it explains the chainsaw, and the chainsaw explains everything else. I was drowning quietly, the way newly single mothers do. I had a 6-year-old who cried for his father, a store I had just taken over and was terrified of losing, and a body that ran on about 5 hours of sleep and a great deal of grim momentum. I had no patience left over for anything that did not directly keep the 3 balls of my life in the air: Sam, the store, the house. Beauty was a luxury I had stopped being able to see. Other people's feelings were a luxury I had stopped being able to afford. When I looked at the world that year, I did not see meanings, or histories, or 50-year-old love letters. I saw problems and solutions, obstacles and tools. It was the only way I knew how to survive. And I am not entirely sorry for it, because it did get us through. But I have had to understand that the same hardness which kept my little family alive was the hardness that swung that chainsaw, and that a tool which saves you in one season can do terrible damage in the next, if you never learn how to set it down. Let me take you back to the beginning of it, because the beginning is the part I understood the least. 12 years ago, I bought the house next to Edith's. I was 31, newly divorced, with a 6-year-old son named Sam, and a brand new mortgage, and absolutely no margin in my life for anything that was not survival. The house needed work, and the driveway was too narrow to get my truck and the store's deliveries in and out. And running along the property line between my place and Edith's was a long, overgrown, half-wild row of ancient lilac bushes. They were enormous. They blocked the light, they crowded the drive, and to my eye, that first hard spring, they were simply an obstacle between me and a functioning life. So one Saturday, with a borrowed chainsaw and the brisk efficiency I am so proud of, I cut them all down. The whole row. I did not ask anyone. They were on my side of the line, mostly, and I was a practical woman with a problem to solve, and I solved it before lunch. I will never forget Edith's face when she came out onto her porch and saw what I had done. I expected, at most, a quibble about the property line. What I got was something I had no framework for at all. She did not yell. She went absolutely white, and she put one hand on her porch rail as though the world had tilted, and she looked at that row of fresh-cut stumps the way you would look at a body. And then she looked at me, this stranger, this brisk young woman, standing in the wreckage with a chainsaw, and she said, in a voice like a door closing, "You had no right." And she turned around and went inside, and from that morning on, for 12 years, Edith Mercer treated me as something the cold had blown in. And here is the thing I want you to sit with, because I did not sit with it for over a decade. I decided, standing there in the lilac stumps, that she was crazy. That is the word I reached for, the lazy, comfortable word. Crazy old woman, overattached to some shrubs, making a federal case out of yard work. I never once asked myself what those lilacs might have been. I never wondered why a grown woman would go white and grip a railing over a row of bushes. I had a problem. I had solved it. She was upset. And rather than ask a single question, I simply filed her under crazy and difficult, and I built the next 12 years on top of that file without ever reopening it. What followed was a cold war. The small town kind. The kind that runs on nothing and lasts forever. We did not speak. When her maple dropped leaves on my side, I raked them back onto hers. When my son's basketball rolled into her yard, it did not come back. She reported my truck to the town once for blocking the sidewalk. I reported her gutters to code enforcement out of pure spite. We perfected the art of the icy nod at the mailboxes. For 12 years, Edith Mercer was the villain who lived 4 feet from my bedroom window, and every cold thing she did confirmed what I already knew. And I never noticed that I had stopped collecting evidence and started collecting only the evidence that agreed with me. And I taught my son to see her the way I did, which is the part I am most ashamed of now. Children learn contempt the way they learn a language, without effort, just by living in the house where it is spoken. Sam grew up calling her the witch next door, because he had heard the tone in my voice every single time I said her name, and I let him, and sometimes I laughed. When his basketball went over her fence and did not come back, I told him, "See, that's just how she is," instead of walking him next door to knock on the difficult woman's door and ask for it like a human being, which would have taught him something I apparently did not know myself. I had a chance, every day for 12 years, to model for my child what you do with a person you find hard. And what I modeled was a cold nod and a private sneer. I think about that now. Whatever else came out of those years, I raised a boy for a while inside my own smallness, and that is not nothing to have to answer for. Which brings me to this past winter, and the camera. It started small. My trash cans, set out the night before pickup, would be knocked over in the morning, the bags torn. A package went missing off my porch. One morning, I found deep boot prints in the new snow all over my front walk, going right up to my door and back. At some hour I had not heard. And I knew, the way I knew the lilacs were just bushes, exactly who was responsible. The bitter old woman next door had finally escalated from cold to active. She was coming onto my property in the dark. So I did the practical thing, the decisive thing, the Lauren thing. I drove to my own store, took a doorbell camera off the shelf, and mounted it over my door that afternoon, angled to take in the whole front walk and steps. I was almost looking forward to it. After 12 years, I was finally going to have her on film. I checked it for the first time on a Sunday morning, with my coffee, the way you would settle in to watch something you had been waiting for. The camera saved its clips by motion. There were several from the dark hours, all around 5 in the morning, and I clicked the first one, fully expecting to see Edith Mercer knocking over my cans. What I saw was Edith Mercer salting my steps. It was her, unmistakably, in that heavy old green coat she had worn for a decade, moving slowly and stiffly in the dark with a plastic bucket. And she was bent over my front steps, my walk, scattering handfuls of ice melt across them, careful, methodical, covering every inch. The boot prints in the snow that I had blamed her for were hers. She had been coming over before dawn, in the brutal Vermont cold, at 78 years old, to salt the steps of the woman who had cut down her lilacs and reported her gutters and waged 12 years of war on her so that that woman would not slip and fall on the ice in the morning. I sat there, and I watched clip after clip. They went back as far as the camera's storage would hold, and every single dark morning, there she was. The trash cans, I would realize, she had probably been setting back up after the wind, or the animals got them. The boot prints were the boot prints of a century. And then I came to the clip from 3 mornings before. And that is the one where she fell. She must have hit a patch she had not gotten to yet. One moment she was bent over with her bucket, And the next, her feet went out from under her, and she came down full length on the concrete. Hard. The way that breaks bones in a body that age. The camera has no sound, but I watched her lie there, in the dark, in the cold, perfectly still for a long, terrible moment. Long enough that I half rose out of my chair 12 years too late to help. And then I watched her begin, slowly, to move, to get a knee under herself, to reach up and catch the railing, to haul herself by inches back onto her feet. And then I watched Edith Mercer, having just fallen and very possibly hurt herself badly, pick the bucket back up and finish salting my steps, before she turned and made her careful way back home through the dark. I have run a hardware store for 20 years. I have watched 1,000 people walk in and tell me their troubles, and I have never, before or since, felt anything like what I felt watching that small, grainy figure get back up off my steps and finish the job. I put my head down on my kitchen table, and I cried in a way I had not cried since my divorce. Not pretty, the kind that comes up from somewhere old. Because I understood, all at once, the size of what I had gotten wrong. For 12 years I had been so certain. And the woman I had been so certain about had been getting up before dawn, in her pain and her old age and her loneliness, to keep me safe, and had never said one word about it, and had let me go right on hating her. I watched the clip of her falling more times than was good for me, that Sunday. I think I was looking for a way to make it mean something other than what it plainly meant. I kept hoping I would spot some angle where she was the villain after all, where the salting was a trick, a setup, some elaborate way to make me look bad. There was no such angle. There has never in my life been a piece of evidence so total, so completely free of any other reading. A woman gets up before dawn in a Vermont winter, at 78 years old, and falls on the ice while keeping a stranger safe, and then gets back up and keeps going. You cannot spin that. You cannot file that under crazy. I had built a 12-year case in my head, brick by careful brick, and that one grainy clip knocked the whole structure flat. And I sat in the rubble of it and understood that the only villain the camera had ever caught was the woman who had installed it. I did not go over that day. I was too ashamed, and I needed to understand first. And there was one thing I still did not understand, which was why. So I did the thing I should have done 12 years before. I looked into the lilacs. It did not take much. A few questions to the right old-timers in my store, the ones who had known the Mercers forever. And the story I should have asked for on the very first day came out in about an afternoon. The lilacs along that property line had been planted by Edith's husband, Walter, the year the two of them married and bought that house. 50-some years before I came along with my chainsaw. He had planted one bush for every year, the way some men do, adding to the row each spring. That overgrown half-wild hedge, I had seen as an obstacle, had been a 50-year-old love letter. And Walter had died the winter before I moved in, only a few months before I cut his lilacs down. I had not solved a landscaping problem that Saturday morning. I had walked up to a freshly widowed woman and with a borrowed chainsaw cut down 50 years of her marriage, and then I had called her crazy for minding. That was hard enough. But it was when I finally went next door. And I did go, the following week, with no plan and no chainsaw and nothing in my hands at all, that I learned the rest of it, the part that turned the salt on those steps from a kindness into something almost unbearable. She did not want to let me in. Of course she did not. But she did, eventually, and we sat in her front room with the bad tea she made, both of us stiff as fence posts, and I told her, plainly, that I had seen the camera footage, and that I knew now what the lilacs had been, and that I was more sorry than I had words for the lilacs, for 12 years, for all of it. And Edith Mercer, who had not said a soft word to me in over a decade, looked at her hands for a while, and then she told me about the steps. Walter had died of a fall, not the lilacs. That grief was its own thing, but the actual dying, the end of him, had started on an icy step. He had gone out one winter morning for the paper, on steps that a neighbor across the way had promised to keep clear, and had not, and he had slipped and broken a hip, And a broken hip at his age is the beginning of the end so often, and it was the beginning of his. Edith had spent the last months of her husband's life watching him decline from a fall that a little salt and a little neighborliness would have prevented. And she had made herself a promise, in her grief, a strange and stubborn and entirely Edith promise, that as long as she was able, not one soul on her street would ever go out onto unsalted ice. Not one. Not even, she said this to me directly, looking right at me, not even the careless young woman next door who had cut down Walter's lilacs and never once said she was sorry. Especially not her, Edith said, because if anything ever happened to you on those steps, and I had not salted them, I would have become the neighbor who let it happen, and I could not have lived next to that. She had been protecting me for years, not because she had forgiven me. She had not really, not then, but because protecting me was the only way she had left of keeping faith with her husband. Her kindness to me was not about me at all. It was about Walter, and somehow that made it bigger, not smaller. We are not best friends now. I want to be honest about that, the way this whole story has had to be honest. You do not turn 12 years of a Cold War into a warm friendship over one cup of bad tea, and Edith is 78 and prickly and set in her ways, and I am still the woman who cut down the lilacs, and that does not unhappen. But the war is over. That much is real. I salt her steps now, in the dark, before she can get to mine. It has become a small, silent contest between us, who gets out there first, and more mornings than not, she still beats me, which I think she enjoys. I planted lilacs along the line again last spring. Not 50. I will not live long enough to be cute about it. But a start. She watched me dig the holes from her porch, and did not say anything, but she brought me a glass of water halfway through, and set it down on the step, and went back inside. And that glass of water is one of the better things that has ever happened to me. Sam is 18 now, and home from his first year away. And the other week, I watched him carry Edith's groceries up her freshly salted steps without being asked, and then stand on her porch talking with her for 20 minutes about nothing, the easy way you do with a grandmother. He does not remember calling her the witch next door. He was too young, and I have never once reminded him. But I remember, and watching him on that porch, easy and kind with the woman I had taught him to sneer at, I felt the strangest mix of shame and gratitude I have ever felt. Shame at the years, and gratitude that it was not, after all, too late for him to learn the other thing. Children can be raised inside your smallness for a while and still grow up large, if you are lucky, and if you correct course before the concrete sets. I corrected mine about 11 years later than I should have. But I corrected it while we could all still feel the difference, and Edith got, near the end of a hard life, a teenage boy carrying her groceries up her steps. And I will take that trade. If there is a difficult person in your life, a neighbor, a co-worker, a cold relation, someone you long ago filed under bitter and never reopened the file on, then this story is for you. One word in the comments, if it found you. Salt. Just that. It is for the person whose hardness you have explained to yourself 100 times, and whose reasons you have never once actually asked to hear, and who may, for all you know, be out salting your steps in the dark. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one, before I go. The first, be very slow to call a person bitter. Bitterness is almost never the whole of someone. It is the scar, and a scar means there was a wound, and you are looking at the scar precisely because you never asked about the wound. I looked at Edith Mercer for 12 years, and saw only a hard, cold, difficult old woman, and I was looking the entire time at a widow in the deepest grief of her life, who had watched her husband die from a fall, and had quietly devoted what was left of her own strength to making sure no one else did. The hardest people you know are very often the ones carrying the heaviest thing, and the hardness is just the shape grief takes when it has been left alone too long. Ask what they lost. You will almost always find that they lost something, and that it explains nearly everything. The second, when you are quick and competent and sure of yourself, the way I have spent my life being proud of being, You have a particular danger that gentler people do not, and it is this: you size things up fast, and you act, and then you never go back to check whether you were right. I cut down those lilacs in a morning, and I had Edith filed under crazy by lunch, and the speed of it felt like strength and was actually the great weakness of my life. If you are a person who decides quickly, build yourself one habit. The one I learned 12 years too late. Go back. Reopen the file. Check your work on the people you were so sure about. You may find, as I did, that the thing you settled in 4 seconds was the thing that most deserved your whole life's attention. We so rarely know what the cold ones are keeping warm, so be slow to call a person bitter when you have never once asked them what they lost. I'll see you next time.